Hello again. It's been a little while since I've done a video update like this, so figured it'd be time to do another one. I've actually made a lot of progress recently, so a lot to talk about. So got back to Colorado earlier this month after the holidays, and started off with these tail ribs back here. And I think this is kind of where the last video left off. Before that, I guess I should say that this cap strip back here was put in. Did that, and then the pulley bracket, and got that finished up. So it's there for the aileron and all ready to go. So once all of that was done, I started to work on these tail ribs, and really they just get riveted on to the spar there all the way down, and then those that match up with the center ribs get dimpled and match drilled, and then you dimple these so that it's kind of recessed to there, and then riveted, and you can see those rivets sit flush because of the dimple that they're sitting in. So that happened to all of those. It was a little interesting on them where they meet up with the double ribs here, because they have this extra little tab, and I can show you on this one. You can see this tab sticking down the side, hopefully, with the hole in it. And that's because they use these same ribs for the EX3 as the 2. So I had to trim that tab some so that it would actually fit in between the double ribs here. And I did ask, you don't use that tab anywhere on these. They also, on these tail ribs back here on the inboard side where the flap will go, they've got 2 holes kind of pre-drilled for you to match drill. The manual only calls for 1. I've seen a lot of people on the forum saying, go ahead and do both. It doesn't hurt anything to do both. It just makes it a little stronger at the cost of using an extra rivet. So Craig and I figured why not, and we both did that. It was especially helpful because on this one, and I don't know if you can see that down there at the bottom, this happened to mine and Craig's, but those holes get very close to the edge of the material there. You can kind of see the dimple is going off the edge just a little bit. So we figured, especially with that kind of close edge distance, it wouldn't hurt to go ahead and have 2 rivets holding it. So all the tail ribs got attached though, and that actually went pretty well and nice and smoothly. There's a little bit of extra trimming, I guess, as well, that I should talk about. Down here, you trim right there underneath so it doesn't stick out past the bottom of the spar cap, so that you can eventually fit the false rib in there that's going to go under the fuel tank. And then the manual doesn't call for this yet. Dave Embry had mentioned it, but I went ahead and trimmed this back so that it is kind of in line with the front of the spar there. You do that later so that the tank extension skin can kind of wrap around, go over in front of that, and then sit down and rivet to the spar. So you've got to trim that later, if not now, and I went ahead and did it now so that I could take before I installed the tail rib, so that I could take it off and, get that trimmed nicely and deburred and everything, easier than doing it once it's on there. So tail ribs went on. That was all pretty nice. And then I worked on this flap false spar. So there's this hanger right here, and this guy is going to hold the flap on this side and the aileron on that side. So this is the flap false spar. It kind of forms the trailing edge of the wing, kind of gives it that shape and for the fabric to go around it and everything. And it also rivets to this hanger so that instead of sitting out here by itself, it's now, super, super solid. When I was doing this, you notice that it sits down below the bottom of the spar there. Just a little bit, which makes sense. The fabric doesn't wrap across the spar. It wraps, across this and the ribs, which stick down below the spar as well. So I had to slide everything back just a little bit here on the sawhorses to get that to clear. Because of that, you can kind of see I've got a clamp on the front spar there, a clamp on the front spar out there, and then just a little extra clamp on my 1-inch block back here, because I wanted them to be the same distance, the spars to be the same distance from the edge of both sawhorses. And that just lets me make sure it's not going to fall off of that block or slide or anything, since it is close to the back. I am going to have to go through and I think get a 2x2 and raise the spar in all the corners, and I'll talk about that in a second as to why. But yeah, so that's looking pretty good. When I install this flap false spar, you kind of fit it on there. And they don't tell you exactly that it needs to line up with the edge there. I wanted there to be a little bit of a gap here between the flap false bar and the hanger. Hopefully that's visible, just so that nothing would rub. In the manual, it looks like it sticks over just a tiny bit here as well, so that's kind of what I went for. So you get that lined up there. Clamp a square onto this false, or onto this hanger and to the spar, and that way it all, that way you're making sure that's square. And then I came through with a little machinist square and made sure that each of these were square as well before I drilled them. So, started with this one because it tells you to work inboard and out to outboard. So top there, and then the top here, and then, going back to number 2 since it's not actually attached to a center rib. Number 1, they tell you not to rivet the top and the bottom. So I wrote no on it just to remind myself. And I also wrote no here to remind myself there because obviously that rivets both the aileron and the flap false spar, so I wanted to make sure I didn't mess that up either. So that was the flap false spar, and you do have to drill some kind of tricky holes in here in the hanger. Per Craig's advice, this one on the bottom, I drilled from the bottom instead of from the top here, with measuring carefully. And then these two in the curved part, I drilled with an angle drill. They're just a little tricky to get to. This bottom one ended up going fine. The top one still has a cleco there just because I made that hole a little bit oblong in the sheet metal part, fortunately not in the hanger because the drill bit walked a little bit on me when I was trying to drill it. So, if we look at it from the back side here, it's got plenty of edge clearance. I did measure that. It's a good looking hole, but because it's a little bit big through the sheet metal part, I am getting a rivet with an oversized head just to see if I feel like I like that better. But I did verify with Cup Crafters it's fine. I could use the normal rivet, but I just want to kind of see what the bigger rivet's going to look like instead. So after that false spar that inboard flap false spar was done, the hanger done except for that one rivet there. I went ahead and started on the aileron false spar here. And you can see right here, there's actually an overlap because it's 2 pieces. So one of the first things they tell you to do, you measure the distance from that inboard hanger to the center hanger and make sure that that's correct. And then you're going to, they tell you to nest these together so you can put them on the wing. Well, they tell you the outboard one is supposed to slide into the inboard one, and it's probably easier to see from here. You can see right there that it does for most of it, except for at the very top where the outboard one has a flap that sticks over top. And these holes are all pre-drilled into the false spar. The ones on the flap false spar are not. You just measure the holes, mark, and I actually used an automatic center punch with some wood behind it to kind of put a punch in the hole in the right spot to try to keep the drill bit from wandering when I drilled the holes. So out here, they're actually pre-drilled through the false spar. So it made sense for it to work like this, but it didn't line up with what was in the manual. Ended up confirming that this was right because Dave Embry in his build guide does call out that they've changed the parts but haven't updated the manual. So made me feel better once I saw that. But you get this all nice and lined up here and just put on the wing. And then from there, you again make sure that this hanger is perfectly square. Make sure that the aileron false spar tab is under the flap false spar here. The aileron part nests into a different curved piece down here. And get that all clamped so that it's lined up. This one is supposed to be lined up directly with the edge, nice and flush right there. You can kind of see on the top one, it's nice and flush with the edge. So once you get all of that done, then there are some kind of guides that hold it here, and there's a bolt that goes through the hole to hold it in place temporarily. And you've got basically just a like a shop aid. and it sits here on the back of the false spar and nests into the actual spar right there. That sets the distance between the two correctly, and it sets the angle of the curve back here. So they give you the order. I think it started with this rib here, number 6, if I remember correctly. But they basically tell you, start with this one, drill the top. Then I think they have you go out to 7, drill the top. And then you drill all of them for the aileron as well. And I actually apologize. The one that I had messed up here, I'm just now realizing that was the aileron one. That the hole didn't quite work out on. I'm missing the flap one. The other one that you've got is actually back there. You can kind of see it behind and from the top right there. But you drill and rivet all those holes, and then come back with the shop aid and finish the rest of these where they're connected to a center rib. So there's, of course, the one on the top, 2 down here on the back, looking at my reflection there, and then 1 down here on the bottom, if it'll focus on it. There we go. So you get all of those drilled, and then you actually have to go ahead and pull all of the rivets because clecos sticking out will prevent you from putting the aileron on. And the next thing that you do is you temporarily install the aileron. Again, measure the distance between these hangers, make sure it's correct, and then you actually get this bracket attached to the center aileron hanger. Just snug the bolt at first, and then match drill those center 2 rivet holes into the back. Put clecos in, and then you go down and you clamp this guy, or clamp this flat false spar so that it's flush with the outer edge of the outboard aileron hanger here. And then with the aileron on it, and there are some pictures and stuff, but you measure the distance back here from the edge of this to the edge of the aileron. And they tell you it's supposed to be between 5/16 and 3/8. So you verify that measurement. You stack up more washers basically between here and the aileron to kind of get it there. Once you do, you've got it clamped out there. You get this guy clamped at the overlap. You take the aileron off, and then using that same shop aid, went through and drilled and clecoed all 3 of these guys. At that point, this is nice and lined up flush. Because of the clamps, nothing should have moved, and it should work out nicely. And you can go ahead and drill the outer one. What I ended up doing was pulling all of the rivets here in these ribs, putting the aileron back on since it doesn't interfere with drilling out here, and then verifying that measurement one more time before I drilled. So got these drilled. There are 4 rivets out here. You can see the top one. There are kind of 2 you can see the back of on the curve, and then 1 on the bottom there. So that's all nice and drilled and riveted now. So that's set the angle on that outboard hanger. And then finally, well, not finally, there are 2 more steps left, I guess. Came back in these little tail ribs that are not attached to the center ribs. Just, you center those, and basically what you did for all of these, since you're setting the distance with the shop aid, you just center that on the pre-drilled holes here, and then just drill straight through. So that's what I did on these with the shop aid. And it worked fine. Once you get to those last little 3 guys here, everything is pretty well set, so they're not really going to go anywhere, and they're just there to provide some extra strength. Yeah, once all that was done, then finally you get to this hanger, and this ended up being a real pain because this bracket was not bent in a way that it sat flush with the metal here for the false spar. So there's a lot of clamping and futzing to try to get these to sit flat so that you can match drill the hole from the back and then get them riveted. Craig came over, just finished that part today and got all of them in. That bottom one down here was really a pain because it had a pretty good gap between that and the false spar. So we ended up having to kind of bend it out so that we could bend it back in and get it to sit flat. But ended up getting that. So all of those rivets, you can see from here, they're all Cherry Maxes, but those are all pulled. And I mean, this thing is incredibly strong now. It just has no wiggle. So other than that last missing rivet right there where the cleco is, this is all done. That last rivet should get here on Wednesday. And next time I work, I'll just, test it out and see if I like the larger head diameter, if it sits nice and flat and looks like it'll do a good job. Otherwise, Cub Crafters already said going with the normal one would also be okay. And if the bigger one doesn't look like it's going to work as well, I'll just go with the normal one and go ahead and pull the rivet there. Yeah, so the back, other than that one, is it's pretty much all done. It's really, really great to see this progress, and it's amazing, once you get all of this stuff riveted, like how strong this is from, what started as pretty flimsy sheet metal. Definitely looks really good, starts to look a lot more like a wing and feel like a lot of good progress. It's also helped that I've been able to work on this as many days in the past 2 weeks since I've been back from Kentucky as I had in the previous 3 months before that. Just because of actually getting to make steady progress, not getting stuck on things, having all the parts and tools that I needed, some free time to actually work, all that stuff's helped. So it feels really good to make progress. The next couple things that are going to happen is there are some what they call machine tail clips, and they just connect these. These other ribs where they connect through are already connected together. But because this is going into a machined tail rib, there's a clip that sits on top and bottom. So do one out here for rib number 12 and the outboard aileron hanger, and then coming inboard here on this center aileron on this aileron and flap hanger, there's one that can attaches top and bottom here as well. Hopefully that's not too much work. It's got a few more Cherry Maxes in it. Our Cherry Max pneumatic puller is really struggling to pull the rivets right now, so we're going to send it off to be serviced. But not sure if we're going to go ahead and do that now or wait for these rivets to be pulled first. But regardless, there are some Cherry Maxes in there. We can always pull them once the rivet puller gets back if we go ahead and just drill the holes in Cleco them. Anyway, that's the next step. And then at that point, the trailing edge here is going to be done, and I get to move around to the leading edge. One of the other things I did while I was waiting for someone to be able to come help on the trailing edge was trim all of the nose ribs, and I don't have them out right now, but they're just going to attach here. This is an intermediate one that's not attached to a main rib at all, but you can see, one would attach here and go into the double rib, and kind of just like the tail ribs on the back, but these are going to form the leading edge shape instead. I did get all those trimmed, so they are ready to be installed. I'm just not going to have a chance to do it tonight. The one that attaches out here, right here in this position, had to have some special trimming so that it would fit around this lift strut bracket, and also so that this drag wire could kind of stick through the middle of it. There's a hole that has to go there. I don't think I measured wrong. I checked it a couple times, but per the manual, I drilled the hole where it called for, and it was a little low, so I did have to kind of enlarge the hole upwards with a file to get that to fit, but it ended up working out just fine and looking good. So that's coming up next is the nose ribs, and then after that, I actually get to run some pitot tubing and wires and things in the wing, which will be exciting, and starting to get close to the point at that point where I can take this wing, put it in this holder over here, and start to get the second wing to the same point. So, by the time it goes in the holder, it'll be a little over halfway through the build for the wing as far as number of steps go. But as far as, the actual amount of work, I think it should be well over halfway, just because there are a lot of smaller steps in the second half, like running the control cables out through the wing, was just kind of fishing some steel cables through. That's a whole step. There are some foam spacer blocks that it has you put in here towards the end, and that's a whole step. So some smaller steps as you get towards the end, which I think, should mean that I'm over halfway through as far as number of steps goes. I should also mention, before I install the nose ribs, and part of the reason I'm not doing it yet, is you'll notice that, this hole right here where one goes, and then I've got the same problem on the outboard end. It lines up directly with the sawhorse, and that won't work because, just like the center ribs, those nose ribs extend below the spar. So I'm going to have to get a 2x2 block for each sawhorse that I can kind of fit in there and clamp or screw down into the sawhorse, raise the spars a little bit on a narrower kind of part in the middle. That'll help with the false spars in the back. Let me center it on the sawhorse a little bit more too. But I'll need to do that before I install the nose ribs. So really, really getting there, looking good, and feels really good to have this amount of progress and see how solid it's starting to make the wing. Really got to thank Zach Carson and Alex House both came out and helped me. There's a couple of my friends with the Aileron false spar where I needed 2 people and was to use the shop aid and drill all the holes and everything like that, put the aileron on and off. So really appreciate that. And then of course Craig came out and helped, especially on that center aileron hanger, getting that attached and everything like that, and gave me a lot of tips since he had gotten this part done before I did. So thanks for all the help from everybody, and really, really cool to have all this progress and get to see everything.